A tractor engine was hiding inside a family car, and almost nobody who bought it in 1948 ever knew it. That single fact turned an ordinary British saloon into one of the strangest engineering crossovers in automotive history. A car so trusted that it was shipped to 75 different countries around the world. And yet today most people walk past a surviving standard Vanguard without realizing what they are actually looking at. By the time this video ends, you will know exactly why this car carried a warship's name, why its engine came from a farm, why it was never even sold to British buyers at first, and why one of its rarest versions was secretly a sports car wearing a family car's clothes, all backed by real, genuinely verifiable history. Let's begin at the very start, because even the name itself hides a real story. When Standard Motor Company revealed this car in July 1947, they did not simply pick a name off a list. They named it after HMS Vanguard, the last battleship the Royal Navy ever built, launched in 1944 to huge national pride. Historical accounts suggest that using this name was not a simple formality and that Standard had to work closely with senior Royal Navy circles just to secure the right to use it. Think about what that meant to a buyer in 1947, someone who had likely spent years in uniform, sitting behind the wheel of a car that quite literally carried the name of victory itself. That is not marketing. That is a nation placing its pride into a family saloon. Now here is something almost nobody notices, even standing right next to one. This was the very first Standard model ever to wear the brand new badge, a heavily stylized griffin with its wings spread across the bonnet. And that same griffin badge would go on to represent Standard for years afterward. Once you know that, you cannot look at that little emblem the same way again. It was the beginning of a whole new visual identity for the company. And while we are talking about how this car looked, here is something that quietly surprised British buyers in 1947. Because the Vanguard's smooth, rounded, sloping rear end was not really a British idea at all. It was shaped by Standard's chief stylist, Walter Belgrove, who openly drew inspiration from contemporary American cars, particularly the Plymouth, giving the Vanguard a rounded, streamlined silhouette that looks strikingly modern next to the tall, narrow, boxy saloons Britain had been building since before the war. Picture walking into a Standard showroom in 1947, surrounded by cars that still look like they belonged to the 1930s, and then seeing this one gently curved shape sitting in the corner. It must have felt like a genuine glimpse of the future. Once you know that slice of American design language is sitting underneath a British badge, you simply cannot unsee it every time you look at an early Phase 1 Vanguard. But the real surprise, the one most enthusiasts never fully appreciate, is what was happening under that bonnet. In 1946, Standard signed an agreement with Harry Ferguson to build the legendary Ferguson 220 tractor. The tractor that would go on to transform farming across Britain and beyond, and to power it, Standard developed a brand new 2-litre wet liner engine. What most people never realized is that this exact engine design, in a slightly different form, went straight into the Standard Vanguard as well. This was not an accidental shortcut. It was a genuinely clever piece of post-war industrial thinking because Britain in the late 1940s desperately needed both cars and tractors, and building one rugged, dependable engine architecture for both meant Standard could produce parts faster and more affordably while keeping quality high. For an everyday Vanguard owner, this meant something you could actually feel every single day behind the wheel. A genuinely tough engine that simply refused to give up, the same durability that farmers across the country were already relying on out in muddy fields. There is something quietly moving about that. The same design keeping a tractor running through a harvest was also getting a family safely to church on a Sunday morning. And if your own father or grandfather ever owned one of these, there is a good chance he bragged about how it simply never let him down, without ever knowing that pride came from a tractor's heart beating under its hood. Now here is a fact that surprises almost everyone. When the Standard Vanguard first rolled off the production line in the middle of 1948, not a single one of them was sold to a British customer. Every early car was allotted entirely to the export trade, meaning if you lived in Britain and wanted one, you simply could not buy it yet. Home market buyers had to wait until cars started trickling through around 1949. Imagine being a British customer, reading about your own country's brand new post-war car in the newspaper, and being told you cannot actually have one because it is needed abroad first. That decision was not an accident either. Britain was in a genuine economic crisis after the war, desperately short of foreign currency, and the government needed manufacturers to earn dollars and pounds from overseas sales before anything else. The Vanguard ended up being shipped to an incredible 75 different countries, which meant this very British car was often a far more common sight on the streets of Sydney, Bombay, or Cape Town than it ever was back home in Coventry. Somewhere right now, there could be an old photograph sitting in a family album on the other side of the world, showing a proud owner leaning against a Vanguard parked outside a farmhouse in rural Australia or a bungalow in India. And that photograph exists precisely because of a decision made in a boardroom in Coventry to send this car abroad before its own countrymen ever got the chance to buy one. Here is another detail that quietly changed how people drove long distances. In 1950, The standard Vanguard, alongside its sister car, the Triumph Renown, became one of the very first cars in the world fitted with the Lecoq de Normanville overdrive. This clever piece of engineering worked on the second and third gears of the 3-speed gearbox, effectively giving the car 5 usable gears instead of 3. What most drivers actually felt was a completely different kind of journey, quieter at speed, more relaxed on long motorway stretches, and noticeably better on fuel, at a time when most family cars still felt strained the moment you pushed them past 60 miles an hour. Once you had driven a car with that overdrive engaged, you understood exactly why owners of the era genuinely loved it. It turned a simple family saloon into something that felt almost effortless on a long journey, the kind of small mechanical click that made a Sunday drive to the seaside feel like a treat instead of a chore, something an entire generation of British families still remember fondly whenever the subject of the Vanguard comes up. Now let's talk about a secret hiding in plain sight for anyone who ever owned a diesel Vanguard, because in February 1954, Standard became the very first British car manufacturer to offer a factory-fitted diesel engine as an option on a passenger car. At a time when diesel power was still seen as something only found in buses, lorries, or tractors, Standard quietly gave ordinary family buyers a genuine choice. What most people never realized is just how forward-thinking that decision actually was. It gave fleet buyers and long-distance drivers an option nobody else in Britain was offering, years before diesel passenger cars became anything close to normal. And here is a secret that will genuinely surprise anyone who assumes the Vanguard was simply a slow, sensible family car, because the rare Vanguard Sportsman, built between 1956 and 1958 with only around 900 examples ever produced, was fitted with a genuine TR3 sports car specification engine. Imagine that for a moment, the same mechanical heart from Standard's own sports car quietly dropped into a car that looked, from the outside, like something your accountant would drive. Owners who discovered this often described the same feeling. A genuine jolt of surprise the first time they put their foot down and realized this was not behaving like an ordinary saloon at all. That is precisely why the Sportsman remains one of the most sought-after Vanguards among collectors today, because it proves this car was never quite as ordinary as its shape suggested. And every time one appears at a classic car show, there is almost always a small crowd gathered around it, quietly, listening to the engine note and wondering how something so understated could be hiding so much genuine performance. And finally, one of the most overlooked engineering changes in the Vanguard's entire life happened when Standard finally abandoned the old-fashioned separate chassis design completely for the Phase 3 model, moving instead to unitary, or monocoque, body construction. This might sound like a small technical detail buried in an old brochure, but it genuinely changed how the later cars handled, how stiff the body felt, and how efficiently they could be built on the production line, making the final generation of Vanguards noticeably more modern underneath than the very first cars that left the factory back in 1947. Once you put all 7 of these secrets together, the shared tractor engine, the warship's name earned through careful negotiation, the export-only production, the pioneering overdrive gearbox, the trailblazing diesel option, the sports car engine hiding inside the humble Sportsman, and the shift to modern monocoque construction, you start to realize the Standard Vanguard was never just another forgettable British saloon from the 1950s. It was a car built at the exact moment Britain needed to rebuild itself, carrying genuine engineering ambition inside a shape that looked comfortingly ordinary. And that quiet blend of substance hidden behind simplicity is exactly why people who actually owned one still speak about it with real affection today. Did you or someone in your family ever own a Standard Vanguard? Or maybe even ride in one as a child? Tell me your memory in the comments below. I would genuinely love to read it. Every single story matters, and if this brought back a piece of that post-war world for you, feel free to pass it along and share it with someone else who might remember it too, someone who genuinely deserves to feel that same warm wave of nostalgia all over again.